The thunder rolled across the plains, rattling the worn wooden planks of Samuel Fletcher's stable as Zara Adams clutched the feverish child closer to her chest. Her tattered dress, once a vibrant blue, now hung in dusty tatters around her slender frame. They had been on the run for 3 days, ever since the raiders had burned down the orphanage in Copper Creek. Little Thomas was the only child she'd managed to save, and his cough was getting worse with each passing hour. The year was 1873, and the unforgiving terrain of the Colorado Territory offered little mercy to a young woman with no money and a sick child. The stable had seemed like a sanctuary when she'd stumbled upon it an hour ago, the rain beginning to fall in icy sheets across the windswept prairie. Zara had not expected anyone to return to the stable before morning. She certainly hadn't expected the tall figure who now stood silhouetted in the doorway, water dripping from his wide-brimmed hat, a rifle held casually in one hand. "Well now," came the deep drawl as lightning flashed, illuminating piercing blue eyes beneath the shadow of his hat. "Seems I've got myself some unexpected guests." Zara pulled Thomas closer, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. "Please, sir, the child is sick." "We'll be gone by morning, I promise." The man stepped forward, setting his rifle against a post before kneeling down to her level. His face came into view weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and those startling blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Both of you are mine now," he said, his voice softer than she'd expected. Zara's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the cowboy said, removing his hat to reveal a shock of dark brown hair, "that neither of you are going anywhere in this weather, especially not with that little one burning up with fever." He reached out, his calloused fingers gentle as they touched Thomas's forehead. "My name's Samuel Fletcher. This is my ranch, and you two are staying right here until that boy's well again." The child coughed weakly in his sleep, and Samuel's eyes narrowed with concern. "How long has he been like this?" 2 days, Zara whispered, surprised at the tenderness in this stranger's voice. "The orphanage burned down. We've been traveling since. I'm Zara Adams. I was the caretaker there." Samuel nodded, standing up in one fluid motion. "Wait here." He disappeared into the rain, leaving Zara confused and still frightened. She considered running, but where would she go? The storm was worsening, and Thomas needed shelter. Minutes later, Samuel returned, soaked to the skin but carrying a bundle in his arms. "My house is just up the hill," he explained, crouching beside her again, "but I don't think we should move the boy tonight, so I brought the necessities to us." He unfolded a thick woolen blanket, followed by a flask of what smelled like broth and a small leather pouch. "My mother's remedies," he explained, opening the pouch to reveal dried herbs. She was half Cheyenne, knew more about healing than any doctor I've met. Zara watched in stunned silence as this stranger, this cowboy who had every right to throw them out, instead built up the fire in the small stove at the corner of the stable, heated water in a kettle, and mixed in the herbs. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked as he handed her a cup of the fragrant brew. Samuel's eyes met hers, serious and calm. "Madam, out here, we don't ask many questions when someone needs help, we just give it." He nodded toward Thomas. "Try to get him to drink this, it'll bring the fever down." As Zara carefully woke Thomas and helped him sip the bitter tea, she couldn't help but study the cowboy who was now spreading his bedroll on the other side of the stable, giving them space but staying close enough to help if needed. "You're staying too?" she asked. Samuel looked up, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Like I said, both of you are mine to look after now, at least until morning." He settled down on his bedroll, hat pulled low over his eyes. "Try to get some sleep, Miss Adams. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out what comes next." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the stable, for the first time in days, Zara felt safe enough to close her eyes. Morning came with golden light streaming through the cracks in the stable walls. Zara woke with a start, momentarily disoriented until she felt Thomas stirring beside her. His forehead was cooler to the touch, his breathing easier. Relief flooded through her. "He's looking better," came Samuel's voice. He was already up, feeding the horses in their stalls. Your mother's remedy worked wonders, Zara said, sitting up and straightening her disheveled hair as best she could. Thank you, Samuel nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Breakfast is waiting up at the house when you're ready, take your time. He hesitated, then added, and Miss Adams? You're welcome to stay as long as you need to get back on your feet. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding across the yard toward a modest but well-maintained farmhouse set against the backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. Zara looked down at Thomas, who was blinking up at her with more clarity than he'd shown in days. Where are we? He asked, his voice small but stronger. Somewhere safe, she told him, smoothing back his sandy hair. Just for a little while. After helping Thomas wash up with water from the pump outside, Zara carried him toward the house. She was struck by the neatness of the place, a proper ranch with cattle in the distant fields, a vegetable garden to one side of the house, and chickens pecking in a fenced yard. It wasn't grand, but it spoke of hard work and care. Samuel met them at the door, ushering them into a kitchen that smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Sit, he said, pulling out a chair for Thomas. You both look like you could use a proper meal. As they ate, Zara barely restraining herself from devouring the food, too quickly Samuel asked few questions, instead telling them about his ranch. He'd inherited it from his father 5 years ago, expanded it slowly but steadily, and now ran a respectable operation with the help of just 2 hired hands who lived in a bunkhouse down the hill. They're good men, he assured her, noticing her anxious glance out the window. Wade's been with me since my pa's time, and Miguel came on last spring. They won't give you any trouble. Zara nodded, finally gathering the courage to ask, Mr. Fletcher, I appreciate your kindness, but I need to be honest with you. We have nowhere to go. The orphanage was all I had, and now. She trailed off, unable to voice the desperation of their situation. Samuel sipped his coffee thoughtfully. What skills do you have, Miss Adams? I can cook, clean, so I taught the children at the orphanage basic reading and figures. Before that, I worked for a dressmaker in Denver. Samuel nodded as if confirming something to himself. As it happens, I'm in need of someone to help around the house. My last housekeeper left to get married 2 months ago. The place has suffered for it. He gestured around the kitchen, which, while clean, had a distinctly bachelor feel to it. I can offer you room and board for you and the boy, plus a small wage. Zara stared at him, suspicion warring with hope. Just like that, you don't know anything about us. I know you cared enough about that boy to risk your life saving him from a fire. I know you've kept him alive despite having nothing but the clothes on your back. Samuel's eyes held her steadily. That tells me enough about your character, Miss Adams. Thomas tugged at her sleeve. Can we stay, Miss Zara? I like it here, and Mr. Fletcher makes good bacon. Despite herself, Zara laughed, and Samuel's serious expression warmed into a genuine smile that transformed his face entirely. At least stay until the boy's fully recovered, Samuel said. After that, if you want to move on, I'll help you get wherever you're trying to go. Zara looked around the sunlit kitchen, at Thomas's hopeful face, at the tall cowboy watching her with those intense blue eyes. She'd learned long ago not to trust too easily, but what choice did she have? Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. We accept your offer, at least temporarily. Samuel nodded once, rising to his feet. Then welcome to Fletcher Ranch, Miss Adams. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got cattle that won't move themselves. He paused at the door, looking back at them. Make yourselves at home. I meant what I said last night. While you're here, you're mine to look after. With that, he was gone, leaving Zara to wonder what twist of fate had led them to this place, and this man. The first week at Fletcher Ranch passed in a blur of adjustment. Samuel showed Zara to a small but comfortable bedroom with an adjoining space perfect for Thomas. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, a testament to Samuel's father's ambition and craftsmanship. Pa built on a little each year, Samuel explained as he gave them a tour. Started with just 2 rooms when he married my mother. By the time I was born, it had grown to this. It's lovely, Zara said sincerely, running her hand along a polished banister. Your mother must have been proud of it. A shadow crossed Samuel's face. She died when I was 12. Influenza. He moved on quickly, showing them the pantry and the root cellar, explaining the workings of the pump that brought water right into the kitchen, a luxury Zara hadn't expected. Thomas recovered quickly in the clean mountain air, his cough disappearing entirely by the end of the week. Zara found herself settling into a routine, cooking meals, tidying the house, mending Samuel's clothes, which showed signs of hasty, inexpert repairs. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, she would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes Samuel would join her, sitting in companionable silence or telling her stories about the land and its history. She learned that his mother had been the daughter of a Cheyenne medicine woman and a French trapper, that his father had been a Union soldier who'd come west after the war looking for a fresh start. Pa always said the mountains called to him, Samuel explained one evening, his voice soft with memory. Said once you've seen that sunset over those peaks, no other place feels like home. Zara understood that feeling. Despite everything, despite knowing this arrangement was temporary, she was starting to feel at peace here. On her 10th day at the ranch, Zara was hanging laundry in the yard when she noticed Thomas following Wade, one of Samuel's ranch hands, as the older man repaired a section of fence. The gray-haired cowboy was showing the boy how to hold the nails, explaining something that made Thomas laugh. He's good with children, Samuel's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him leading his horse, having just returned from checking the herd in the north pasture. Thomas has been starved for male attention, Zara explained. At the orphanage, there was only me and Mrs. Peterson, who was nearly 70. She hesitated, then asked, "You don't mind him being underfoot?" Samuel shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "No, madam. A ranch is a good place for a boy to grow up, plenty to learn, plenty of space to run." He glanced at her. "You've done wonders with the house. Hardly recognized my own kitchen yesterday." Zara felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "It's the least I can do. You've been more than generous." Samuel seemed about to say something else when the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the road, and Zara noticed how Samuel's posture changed immediately, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Take Thomas with you?" "Who is it?" Zara asked, alarmed by his reaction. Trouble was all Samuel said, his jaw tight. "Go on now." Zara hurried to collect Thomas, ushering him into the house despite his protests about wanting to finish helping Wade. Through the window, she watched as the riders approached. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-faced. The leader, a tall man with a shock of red hair beneath his hat, dismounted and approached Samuel with a familiarity that suggested they knew each other. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see the tension in Samuel's shoulders, the way Wade and Miguel had both moved closer, hands near their weapons. After several minutes of conversation, the red-haired man spat on the ground, remounted his horse, and the 3 riders departed. When Samuel came inside an hour later, his expression was grim. "Who were those men?" Zara asked as she set a cup of coffee before him. Samuel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Jed Harker and his boys, they run the big spread to the north of here, been trying to buy me out for years." "Getting less polite about it lately." "Why do they want your land?" "Water rights," Samuel explained. "My property controls access to the best stream in the valley. Harker's got 3 times the cattle I do, but in a dry year, he's the one who suffers." He took a sip of coffee. "Also, I think he just doesn't like having a half-breed neighbor." Zara flinched at the casual way he referenced his heritage. "What did he want today?" "Same as always. Made an offer for the land I refused. He made some thinly veiled threats." Samuel's eyes met hers. "Nothing for you to worry about. Harker's all talk." But that night, Zara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding with memories of the orphanage fire. Grabbing her shawl, she rushed to Thomas's side of the room, relief washing over her when she found him sleeping peacefully. The smoke was coming from outside. She went to the window and gasped. The hay barn, some distance from the main house, was engulfed in flames. Figures were running toward it, Samuel, Wade, and Miguel, carrying buckets. Without thinking, Zara threw on her dress over her nightgown and ran downstairs and outside. By the time she reached the barn, it was clear there was no saving it. The men had shifted their efforts to preventing the fire from spreading to the nearby structures. "Samuel," she called out, grabbing an empty bucket to help. He turned, his face streaked with soot, eyes wild with anger and exertion. "Get back to the house, it's not safe." "I can help," she insisted, filling her bucket at the water trough. For hours, they fought the fire together, forming a line to pass buckets. By dawn, the barn was nothing but smoldering ruins, but they'd managed to save the stable and the equipment shed. Exhausted, they gathered near the well, drinking deeply of the cool water. "Harker," Samuel said grimly, breaking the tired silence. "Had to be. You think he did this?" Zara asked, horrified. Samuel's eyes were hard as flint. "I know he did, can't prove it, but I know." Wade spat on the ground. "Want me to ride into town, get the sheriff?" Samuel shook his head. "Sheriff Daniels is Harker's brother-in-law, won't do any good." He looked at the ruins of the barn, jaw clenched. "We'll rebuild, stronger this time." Zara was struck by his resilience, his refusal to be intimidated. As they walked back to the house together, she impulsively reached out and touched his arm. "I'm sorry about your barn." Samuel looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Thank you for helping." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said simply. "You've helped us. We help you in return." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Get some rest, Zara. It's been a long night." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice stirred something within her that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. The barn burning marked a turning point. Over the next few weeks, as they worked together to clear the debris and begin rebuilding, Zara found herself becoming more integrated into the daily life of the ranch. She no longer felt like a temporary guest, but like someone who belonged there. Thomas thrived, following Wade around like a shadow, learning to ride on an old gentle mare Samuel had set aside for him. The boy's nightmares about the orphanage fire gradually ceased, replaced by excited chatter about ranch life and dreams of becoming a cowboy, just like Mr. Samuel. One evening in late September, nearly 2 months after their arrival, Zara was preparing supper when Samuel came in from the fields earlier than usual. "Need to ride into town tomorrow," he announced, washing his hands at the kitchen pump. "Thought you and Thomas might like to come along. You could use some proper clothes, and the boy's outgrowing what he has." Zara paused in her cooking, suddenly aware of how domestic this all felt, discussing household needs as if they were a real family. "That's thoughtful of you, but I haven't earned enough yet to consider it an advance," Samuel interrupted. "Winter's coming, you'll both need warm things." She wanted to argue but recognized the practicality of his suggestion. "Thank you, Thomas will be excited." "He's never been to a proper town before." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Never." The orphanage was quite isolated. Mrs. Peterson believed town influences were corrupting. Zara smiled wryly. "I think she mainly didn't want to handle a dozen children on a shopping trip." Samuel leaned against the counter, watching her work. "And you, where were you before the orphanage?" It was a question he hadn't asked before, seeming content to let her past remain her own. Zara hesitated, then decided he deserved some honesty. "I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a professor of literature. When he died, my mother and I were left with nothing. She took work as a companion to a wealthy widow who was moving to Denver for her health." Zara focused on stirring the stew, avoiding Samuel's eyes. "When Mother died of pneumonia 3 years ago, I had few options. The dressmaker took me on as an apprentice, but when the business failed, the orphanage was the only place offering room and board along with small wages." "I'm sorry about your parents," Samuel said quietly. "Must have been hard ending up so far from home." Zara looked up, surprised by the genuine sympathy in his voice. "Home is where you make it, I've learned. Philadelphia feels like another lifetime now." Samuel nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Well, we leave at first light tomorrow. Town's a half-day's ride." That night, Zara lay awake, thinking about the journey ahead. It would be their first time leaving the safety of the ranch since their arrival. She'd grown comfortable here, perhaps too comfortable. The arrangement with Samuel was meant to be temporary, yet she'd stopped thinking about what came next. The idea of leaving, of taking Thomas away from this place where he was so happy, filled her with a heaviness she hadn't expected. Dawn broke clear and cold with the first hint of frost silvering the grass. Samuel had the wagon ready, with blankets piled in the back for warmth. Thomas was beside himself with excitement, barely able to sit still as they set off down the long road that led to the town of Willow Creek. The journey was pleasant, the wagon rolling through golden aspen groves and pine forests, following the contours of the hills. Thomas peppered Samuel with questions about the town, about the settlers who had founded it, about the Indian tribes who had lived there before. Samuel answered each question patiently, occasionally glancing at Zara with a small smile that made her heart beat faster. She found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the morning light caught in his dark hair. There was a quietness to him, a steadiness that she had come to rely on more than she wanted to admit. Willow Creek turned out to be larger than Zara had expected, a proper town with a main street lined with businesses, a church with a white steeple, and even a small schoolhouse at the edge of town. "First stop is Whitaker's General Store," Samuel announced, pulling the wagon to a halt in front of a large building with a wide porch. "Ben Whitaker's a fair man, won't cheat you on prices." Inside the store, Zara was overwhelmed by the variety of goods. It had been so long since she'd been able to shop for anything beyond absolute necessities. Samuel seemed to sense her hesitation and approached the proprietor himself. "Ben, this is Miss Adams and young Thomas. They're staying at my place. Need to get them fitted out for winter." Ben Whitaker, a balding man with kind eyes, smiled warmly. "Any friends of Samuel's are welcome here. The women's things are in the back corner. Mrs. Whitaker can help with sizing. Young man, we've got boys' clothes right over here." As Zara browsed through fabrics and ready-made garments, she was conscious of the curious glances from other shoppers. A woman about her own age approached, her smile friendly but her eyes assessing. "You must be the woman staying at Fletcher's place. I'm Lily Cooper, my husband runs the livery." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Everyone's been wondering about you. Samuel's never brought a woman to town before." Zara felt her cheeks warm. "It's not what you think, I'm just his housekeeper. Thomas and I needed a place to stay after the orphanage burned." Lily looked disappointed. "Oh, well, that's Samuel for you, always helping strays." She touched the sleeve of a blue dress Zara had been admiring. "This would suit you, brings out your eyes." Before Zara could respond, Samuel appeared beside them, Thomas in tow with an armful of new clothes. "Found everything you need?" he asked, nodding politely to Lily. "Samuel Fletcher, you've been keeping secrets," Lily teased. "The whole town's been talking about your mysterious house guests." Samuel's expression remained neutral, but Zara noticed a tightness around his eyes. "Not much to talk about." "Miss Adams helps around the ranch. I provide shelter. Simple arrangement." Lily looked between them, clearly not believing it was that simple. "Well, you should bring Miss Adams to the harvest dance next month. Everyone would love to meet her properly." After Lily moved away, Zara gave Samuel a questioning look. "Harvest dance? Town tradition," he explained, looking uncomfortable. "Nothing important. They completed their shopping and had lunch at the small cafe next to the general store." Thomas was fascinated by everything, from the printed menu to the glass sugar bowl on the table. "Can we look at the school before we go back?" he asked, his mouth full of apple pie. Samuel glanced at Zara. "That's up to Miss Adams." Zara hesitated. The school represented something permanent, a commitment to staying in this place. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to look," she said finally. The schoolhouse was simple but well-maintained, with rows of desks and a small bell tower. The teacher, Miss Winters, was sweeping the steps when they arrived. "Samuel Fletcher, as I live and breathe," she greeted him warmly. "Haven't seen you in town for months." Samuel introduced Zara and Thomas, explaining that the boy had never attended a formal school. Miss Winters immediately took an interest, showing Thomas the books and the small library in the corner. "We've got 12 students at present, ages 6 to 14, she told Zara. "Thomas would fit right in. School term starts in 2 weeks." "Oh, I don't know if we'll be," Zara began, but Thomas interrupted her. "Please, Miss Zara, I want to come to school. Mr. Wade says every cowboy needs to know his letters and figures." Zara looked helplessly at Samuel, who shrugged. "It's a good school," was all he said. On the journey home, Thomas chattered excitedly about the school, about the new clothes they'd bought, about everything he'd seen in town. Zara was quieter, her mind troubled by the implications of their day. Something wrong. Samuel asked when Thomas had finally fallen asleep in the back of the wagon, worn out from excitement. Zara sighed. "I feel like we're starting to put down roots here. It wasn't the plan." Samuel kept his eyes on the road ahead. "What was the plan?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Find work somewhere, save enough to get our own place eventually." "And is that still what you want?" The question hung in the air between them. Zara looked at the man beside her, at his hands steady on the reins, at the profile that had become so familiar to her over these past months. "I don't know anymore," she whispered. Samuel nodded, as if her answer told him everything he needed to know. "No rush to decide. Winter's coming. Roads will be bad soon anyway. Might as well stay put until spring." It was practical, sensible advice. But as they rode in silence through the gathering dusk, Zara couldn't help feeling that something significant had shifted between them, a door opening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. The first snow came earlier than expected, blanketing the ranch in white just a week after their trip to town. Thomas, who had never seen snow before, was ecstatic, spending hours building snowmen and making angels in the fresh powder. Zara watched him from the kitchen window, her heart full at the sight of his happiness. Samuel and his men worked double shifts to ensure the cattle were properly sheltered and fed, coming in at dusk with red cheeks and frosted beards. These evenings took on a cozy routine: hot meals by the fire, Samuel reading aloud from one of his father's old books while Zara mended clothes, and Thomas built elaborate structures with the wooden blocks Samuel had carved for him. It felt like family, and that realization both warmed and frightened Zara. She had lost too much already to trust easily in permanence. One evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, Samuel surprised her by asking about the orphanage fire. "You never told me exactly what happened that night," he said, closing the book he'd been reading, Zara's hands stilled on her sewing. "It's not a pleasant story." "Few true stories are," Samuel replied quietly. She set aside her work, gathering her thoughts. It was late past midnight. "I woke to the smell of smoke. The fire had already consumed the east wing, where Mrs. Peterson and most of the children slept." Her voice caught. "I tried to reach them, but the hallway was nothing but flames. I still hear them sometimes in my dreams." Samuel moved from his chair to sit beside her on the sofa, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Thomas was in my room that night," she continued. "He'd had a nightmare and couldn't sleep. That's the only reason he survived. I grabbed him and ran out through the kitchen. By then, the whole building was engulfed." She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars from that night. 17 children, Samuel, and Mrs. Peterson, all gone. "It wasn't your fault," he said softly. "I know that. In my head, I know that. But my heart—" She shook her head. "Thomas is the only one left. That's why I'm so protective of him. He's all I have." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, he reached out and covered her hand with his. "You have more than Thomas now," he said, his voice low and serious. "You have a place here, with me." Zara looked up, startled by the intensity in his blue eyes. "Samuel, I'm not asking for anything," he clarified quickly. "Just want you to know that you belong here if that's what you want, both of you." The warmth of his hand on hers sent a current through her body. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with tenderness. Without thinking, she turned her palm upward, entwining her fingers with his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They sat like that for a long while, hands joined, the fire crackling in the hearth, snow falling silently outside the window. It was a small moment, but to Zara, it felt like the beginning of something momentous. As winter deepened, the ranch became increasingly isolated. The road to town was often impassable, and they went weeks without seeing anyone outside their small circle. Thomas started lessons with Zara in the mornings. learning to read and cipher, while his afternoons were spent helping with the indoor ranch chores suitable for a boy his age. Samuel began teaching him to play chess in the evenings, showing a patience that continually surprised Zara. This hard-working cowboy, who could break a wild horse and face down men like Jed Harker without flinching, would sit for hours explaining the movement of pawns and knights to an eager 7-year-old. "You're good with him," Zara observed one night after Thomas had gone to bed. Samuel looked up from the chessboard where he was replaying their game. "He's a good boy, smart, reminds me of myself at that age. Did your father teach you to play?" "No, my mother did." A smile touched his lips. "She was full of surprises, my mother. Spoke 3 languages, played chess like a champion, could track game better than any man I've known." His expression grew distant. "Pa never got over losing her, changed him." "How so?" Zara asked softly, sensing he needed to talk about this. Samuel moved a chess piece absently. "Grew hard. Distant, threw himself into building this ranch like he was trying to outrun his grief." He looked up at her. "That's why I never understood men like Harker who hate because of blood. My father loved my mother until his dying day, never cared that half her blood was Cheyenne." Zara moved to sit beside him, drawn by the rare openness in his expression. "They sound like remarkable people." They were. Samuel studied her face in the firelight. "Pa would have liked you, your strength, the way you care for Thomas." He hesitated, then added, "Mother would have liked you too. Said the measure of a person is in how they face hardship. You've faced more than your share and stayed kind. That's rare." The compliment warmed her through. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his stubble beneath her fingertips. Samuel went still, his eyes darkening. "Zara," he breathed, her name a question and a warning she should pull away. This was crossing a line that would change everything, but she didn't want to pull away. Instead, she leaned forward, her heart hammering, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Then Samuel's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, and the kiss deepened, became something hungry and needful. Zara felt herself melting into him, all the barriers she'd built around her heart crumbling in the face of this unexpected passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I found you in my stable," he confessed, his voice rough. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her fingers still tracing the line of his jaw. "Because you needed safety, not complications." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want you to feel obligated, Zara. Your place here doesn't depend on this." The consideration in his words, the respect he showed for her independence, only made her want him more. "This has nothing to do with obligation," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her racing heart. "This is what I want, what I've wanted for longer than I've been willing to admit to myself." The certainty in her voice seemed to break something loose in Samuel. With a groan, he pulled her into his arms again, his kiss more urgent this time, filled with months of restrained longing. Later, much later, as they sat entwined before the dying fire, Zara's head resting on Samuel's shoulder, he spoke of the future for the first time. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "Not as my housekeeper, as my wife." Zara lifted her head, searching his face for any sign of doubt. "Are you certain? We've known each other less than 6 months." Samuel smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been certain since the 2nd week, just been waiting for you to catch up." His expression grew serious. "I love you, Zara Adams. I love the boy too, want to make you both mine properly, if you'll have me." Tears filled her eyes, happiness bubbling up within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you, Samuel Fletcher." His answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. They agreed to tell Thomas in the morning and to ride into town as soon as the roads cleared to speak with the minister. Zara fell asleep that night with Samuel's words echoing in her mind. "Both of you are mine now." What had sounded possessive that first night in the stable now felt like a promise, a shelter, a home. Thomas took the news of their engagement with characteristic enthusiasm. "Does this mean I can call you Pa?" he asked Samuel over breakfast, his eyes wide with hope. Samuel glanced at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored if you did," he told the boy solemnly. but only if that's what you want. Thomas launched himself into Samuel's arms, nearly knocking over his chair. I've never had a pa before, he said, his voice muffled against Samuel's chest. Well, now you do, Samuel replied, his own voice suspiciously rough, and I promise I'll do my best by you, son. Zara watched them, her heart so full it hurt. Family. After all the loss, all the uncertainty, they had found family in this unlikely place. The roads remained snowbound for another 2 weeks. When they finally cleared enough for travel, Samuel insisted on riding into town immediately. No sense waiting, he said as he hitched the horses to the sleigh. Unless you want a big wedding, Zara shook her head. Just us, and Thomas, of course. The journey to town was magical, the sleigh gliding over packed snow, the jingling of bells, Thomas's excited chatter from beneath the heap of blankets. Zara couldn't remember ever feeling so content, so full of anticipation for the future. Willow Creek was quiet, most people staying close to home in the cold. The minister, Reverend Johnson, was surprised but pleased to see them. Marriage, eh? He said, beaming at them over his spectacles. About time you settled down, Samuel. Your father would be proud. The ceremony was simple, just the three of them and the Reverend's wife as witness. Thomas stood proudly beside Samuel, holding the ring on a small cushion the Reverend's wife had hastily prepared. When Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, his mother's ring, he told her, saved all these years, Zara felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Johnson declared. Samuel, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was sweet and brief, mindful of their audience, but Samuel's eyes promised more to come later. Thomas clapped his hands, earning chuckles from the adults. Their return to town caused quite a stir. Lily Cooper spotted them leaving the church and quickly spread the news. By the time they'd finished their errands, half the town had stopped by to congratulate them. Knew there was more to it than just housekeeping, Lily said with a wink as she hugged Zara. No one looked at their housekeeper the way Samuel looked at you in the store that day. The ride home was quieter, Thomas having fallen asleep after the excitement of the day. Samuel drove with one hand on the reins, the other holding Zara's. Happy, Mrs. Fletcher? He asked, the new name bringing a smile to her lips. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. That night, after they had put Thomas to bed with promises of a celebratory pancake breakfast in the morning, Samuel led Zara to the master bedroom, his room, now their room. I had Wade and Miguel move your things in while we were gone, he explained, looking suddenly nervous. Hope that wasn't presumptuous. Zara stood on tiptoe to kiss him. Not at all, husband, she murmured against his lips. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, each touch a discovery, each kiss a promise. Afterward, lying in his arms, Zara felt a peace she had thought lost to her forever. When I found you in that stable, Samuel said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, I thought you were an angel. Hair all spread out around you, holding that child so protectively even in sleep. Zara smiled against his chest. I thought you were going to throw us out in the storm. Never, he said fiercely. The moment I saw you, something inside me knew, both of you were mine to protect, to cherish. He tilted her chin up, his eyes serious in the lamplight. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, Zara Fletcher. You already are, she whispered, kissing him again. You already are. Spring came to the valley in a rush of melting snow and new growth. The ranch awakened from its winter slumber, calves were born, fields were plowed, and the charred remains of the hay barn were finally cleared away to make room for a new, larger structure. Zara discovered she was pregnant in early April, when the first wildflowers were beginning to dot the meadows. Samuel's joy at the news was boundless. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen while Thomas watched, laughing. A baby brother or sister, Thomas exclaimed. Can I help name it? Of course you can, Zara assured him, ruffling his hair. You'll be a wonderful big brother. Life settled into a happy rhythm. Thomas started attending the school in town, riding in with Wade 3 days a week and returning full of stories and new knowledge. He thrived under Miss Winters's tutelage, his natural intelligence blossoming with proper guidance. Zara's belly grew round as summer approached. She took to sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset while she sewed tiny garments for the coming child. Samuel would often join her, his hand resting protectively on her stomach, his face alight with wonder when he felt the baby kick. "What do you think of Sarah for a girl?" he asked one such evening. "After my mother." "It's beautiful," Zara agreed, "and for a boy," Samuel considered for a moment. "What about James, after your father?" The thoughtfulness of the suggestion brought tears to Zara's eyes. Pregnancy had made her emotional in ways she'd never experienced before. "I'd like that very much." Their contentment was shattered on a hot July afternoon when the sound of approaching riders drew Samuel to the door, his expression immediately hardening when he saw who it was. "Stay inside," he told Zara, reaching for his gun belt. Through the window, she watched as Jed Harker and 5 men rode into the yard. This time there was nothing subtle about their intentions. They were armed, faces set in hard lines. "Fletcher," Harker called out, "time to talk about that water access again." Samuel stepped onto the porch, his stance deceptively casual, but Zara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Nothing to talk about, Harker. My answer hasn't changed." Harker dismounted, his spurs jingling as he approached the steps. "Maybe this will change your mind." He gestured, and 2 of his men rode toward the corral where the best horses were kept. "Those animals aren't yours to take," Samuel said, his voice dangerously calm. "Consider it compensation for all the trouble you've caused me," Harker sneered. "Or maybe we should visit that new barn of yours. See if it burns as nice as the last one." Inside the house, Zara's heart pounded with fear. She glanced around frantically, spotting Samuel's rifle mounted above the fireplace. Moving as quickly as her pregnant body would allow, she retrieved it, checking that it was loaded as Samuel had taught her. Outside, the confrontation was escalating. Wade and Miguel had emerged from the bunkhouse, but they were outnumbered. One of Harker's men had already opened the corral gate, preparing to drive the horses out. Zara stepped onto the porch, the rifle held steady in her hands. "Mr. Harker," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "I suggest you and your men leave our property. Now." Harker turned, momentarily surprised by her appearance. His eyes narrowed when he saw her condition. Well, well, Fletcher's squaw is breeding, how touching." Samuel's hand moved to his gun. "One more word against my wife, Harker, and it'll be your last." The tension in the yard was palpable. Zara kept the rifle aimed at Harker, praying her hands wouldn't shake. She was acutely aware of the child within her, of Thomas, who would be returning from school soon, of everything she stood to lose. The standoff might have ended in bloodshed if not for the timely arrival of a new group of riders. Sheriff Daniels led the party, which included several townsmen Zara recognized from their visits to Willow Creek. "What's going on here, Jed?" the sheriff asked, his tone making it clear he already had a good idea. Harker spat on the ground. "Just having a conversation with Fletcher about business." "With 6 armed men," the sheriff shook his head, "looks more like intimidation to me." He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Zara with the rifle. "Mrs. Fletcher, you can lower that weapon. We'll handle this now." Reluctantly, Zara lowered the rifle, relief making her legs weak. Samuel was at her side instantly, one arm around her waist, supporting her. "Are you all right?" he murmured, concern etched on his features. "Yes," she assured him, though her heart was still racing. "The baby, too." The sheriff was ordering Harker and his men to leave, making it clear that any further trouble would result in arrests. Harker's face was dark with fury, but with the odds now against him, he had little choice but to comply. "This isn't over, Fletcher," he called out as he mounted his horse. "Yes, it is," Sheriff Daniels contradicted him firmly. "Because I'll be keeping a close eye on you from now on, Jed. Your sister won't be happy to hear about this." As Harker and his men rode away, the sheriff approached Samuel and Zara. "Been hearing rumors about Harker causing trouble out here." "Should have paid more attention. I apologize for that," Samuel nodded, still holding Zara close. "What changed? Last I knew, you and Harker were thick as thieves." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Let's just say the town's been talking about the orphanage fire that wasn't no accident. About how some men were paid to make sure no one got out alive." He glanced at Zara. Seems someone wanted that land bad enough to kill for it, someone with connections to mining interests who knew there was copper under that ground. Zara gasped, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. Are you saying Harker was behind the orphanage fire? Can't prove it, the sheriff admitted. But there's enough smoke to make me look harder at where it's coming from, especially now that he's bringing trouble to decent folks like yourselves. After the sheriff and the townsmen departed, promising to check in regularly, Samuel led Zara back inside. She was trembling now, delayed shock setting in. Those children, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. They died because of greed. Samuel held her, his strong arms a shelter as she wept for the lives lost, for the evil that men could do, for the knowledge that her worst nightmares had been deliberately caused. It's over now, he murmured into her hair. You're safe. Thomas is safe. Our baby is safe. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again, she believed him. Despite everything, despite the reminder that the world could be cruel and dangerous, she believed in Samuel's promise to protect them. Thomas returned from school an hour later, full of excitement about a special project his class was working on. Zara and Samuel decided not to tell him about the confrontation with Harker, not wanting to spoil his happiness or frighten him with memories of the fire. That night after Thomas was asleep, Samuel and Zara sat on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him, their hands intertwined on her rounded belly. I was so afraid today, she admitted. Not just for myself, but for our family, for everything we've built together. I know, Samuel said quietly. When I saw you step out with that rifle, he shook his head. Proudest and most terrified I've ever been all at once, she smiled slightly. I surprised myself. Never thought I could stand up to a man like Harker. You're stronger than you know, Zara Fletcher. He pressed a kiss to her temple. It's one of the many reasons I love you. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the peace of the evening settling around them like a blanket. What happens now? Zara finally asked. With Harker, I mean, Samuel sighed. I don't know, the sheriff will keep an eye on him, but men like Harker don't give up easily. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. But we won't face it alone. Today showed me that. The town's standing with us, that means something? Zara nodded, remembering the determined faces of the men who had ridden in with the sheriff. We have friends here, a community. A home, Samuel added softly. The baby kicked then, as if in agreement, and they both laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. Yes, Zara agreed, placing Samuel's hand over the spot where their child was making its presence known. A home. Sarah Fletcher was born on a crisp September morning, arriving with a lusty cry that brought tears to her father's eyes. She had Samuel's dark hair, and when she deigned to open them, Zara's green eyes. Thomas was enchanted with his baby sister, spending hours watching her sleep, singing the songs he'd learned at school to soothe her when she fussed. She knows me, he told Zara proudly when the baby wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb. She knows I'm her big brother. Life with a newborn was exhausting but joyful. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, as willing to walk the floor with a colicky baby as he was to mend fences or break horses. Zara would often awaken in the night to find his side of the bed empty, only to discover him in the nursery. Sarah sleeping peacefully on his chest while he hummed old Cheyenne lullabies his mother had sung to him. The threat from Harker receded as autumn progressed. The sheriff made a point of riding out to check on them regularly, and word came that Harker was facing financial troubles of his own, losing investors after rumors of his involvement in the orphanage fire began to spread. Winter arrived again, wrapping the ranch in white. On Christmas Eve, with a fire blazing in the hearth and Sarah sleeping in her cradle nearby, Samuel presented Zara with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Just open it," he urged, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Samuel's careful handwriting. "I've been working on it for months," he explained as she turned the pages. "It's our story. From the night I found you in the stable to Sarah's birth, thought our children might like to know it someday." Zara ran her fingers over the words, deeply moved by the gesture. "It's beautiful, Samuel, thank you." Thomas, who had been arranging pine cones on the mantel, came over to investigate. "Is that about us?" he asked, peering at the journal. "It is," Samuel confirmed, pulling the boy onto his lap. "About how we became a family." Thomas considered this. "Does it say about the fire and the bad men?" Zara and Samuel exchanged glances. They had eventually told Thomas a simplified version of what the sheriff had revealed about the orphanage fire, wanting him to understand that what happened wasn't random tragedy, but the result of human wickedness. "It mentions those things," Samuel said carefully. "But mostly it's about finding each other, about making a home together." Thomas nodded solemnly. "That's the important part. Miss Winters says home is where the heart is." "Your teacher is a wise woman," Zara said, reaching out to smooth his hair. Samuel wrapped an arm around both of them, his other hand gently rocking Sarah's cradle. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," he confessed quietly. "A family of my own." Zara leaned into him, thinking of that stormy night over a year ago, of the fear she'd felt when his tall figure had appeared in the stable doorway. How could she have known then that this man, this stranger, would become the center of her world? "Both of you are mine now," he had said. Not a threat, as she'd feared, but a promise. A promise he had kept, extending it to include their daughter, creating a circle of love and protection that had healed wounds she'd thought would never mend. "I love you," she whispered, the words simple but filled with everything she felt for this remarkable man. "And I love you," he replied, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight and something more, a deep contentment, a joy that matched her own. "Always will." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside the Fletcher home, all was warmth and light and love, a family forged in adversity, strengthened by choice, bound together by hearts that had found their way home. Spring brought new beginnings. The ranch thrived under Samuel's careful management, the cattle herd growing, the fields yielding abundant crops. Thomas excelled in school, proud to ride his own pony now rather than traveling with Wade. Sarah took her first steps, toddling unsteadily across the kitchen floor while her parents watched with matching expressions of pride and amazement. And in April, almost exactly a year after Zara had first discovered she was carrying Sarah, she shared similar news with Samuel once again. "Another baby?" he asked, his face lighting up with joy. "Already," Zara laughed at his enthusiasm. "The doctor says it will be winter before this one arrives, plenty of time to prepare." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas teach Sarah how to pet a kitten from the new litter in the barn, Samuel took Zara's hand in his. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that this would be my life," he said thoughtfully, "I wouldn't have believed them. Was so set in my ways, thought I knew what my future held." "And what was that?" Zara asked, curious. Samuel shrugged. "Just more of the same, building the ranch, living alone, maybe taking on more hands as the place grew." He looked at her, his expression tender. "Never imagined a family. Never thought I'd find someone who'd want to share this life with me." "I never imagined this either," Zara admitted. "After the orphanage, I was just focused on survival, on keeping Thomas safe." She rested her head against his shoulder. "You gave us so much more than safety, Samuel. You gave us a home." He kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a family, seems like a fair trade." As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. Thomas came running, Sarah perched on his hip, both of them laughing. Samuel lifted his daughter into his arms, while Thomas regaled Zara with tales of the kitten's antics. Together, they walked into the warm, lamp-lit house, the family that had begun on a stormy night with a man's gruff declaration. "Both of you are mine now." Words that had changed everything. Words that had led them home,